Okay, so the day is organised, as Ben and Emily have already said, to maximise the sharing of knowledge and experience of the small-scale art sector in the UK, informed by our international friends. So that's what we're trying to do. And what we're also trying to do is find forms of solidarity in the current conditions of arts provision in the UK. So in his 2007 essay called "Take Me, I'm Yours, Neoliberalising the Cultural Institution," the author, the writer and organiser, Anthony Davis, reported on the contradictions revealed by activist protests against the MACBA in Barcelona's attempt to incorporate their struggles within its programme. This revealed what Davis termed a crisis of legitimation. Not simply of MACBA, not simply a crisis of legitimation of MACBA, but for many more arts institutions at that time. What he described was the inability of an arts organisation, here of course a large and internationally famous one, to confront or change the incongruity of its ambitiously radical exteriority and its own practices of discrimination and exclusion, specifically Davis's terms, in relationship to wage and labour conditions of its own workers. So this is what he called the crisis of legitimation. We might all recognise the fact that this contradiction is still apparent within many arts organisations in the UK as elsewhere, and that it's not so simple to match the appearance of the front of the organisation, its exhibitions and events, and its back, how workers are treated and paid. This will, I hope, be discussed in more detail by some of our speakers today, not least by Lisa Solskano from Wage. But here I want to use Davis's naming of a legitimation crisis as endemic within the UK's arts sector generally and within the small-scale sector specifically. In the context of widespread entrepreneurialism within the arts, cultural workers, many of whom are here today, are often left with little option but to perform this contradiction on a daily basis, competing with their colleagues and co-workers in other galleries, proving to funders that their audience figures are up and their sponsorship letters are out, whilst engaging with intricate political and conceptual discussion with artists whose work directly and indirectly challenges such a culture. Those workers, we, because of this contradiction, are exhausted, overworked, and politically drained. And what drains us politically and emotionally and psychologically is our participation in the cultural industrial infrastructure that dominates our work and our pleasure. So we're here today to gather together, well, we're here today to gather together, primarily, but we're also here to gather together a vocabulary, as Emily and Ben have talked about, of a vocabulary that helps us develop a pragmatic resistance to the totalizing effect of the cultural industrial machine on the practices of artists, curators, workers in the small-scale art sector. The context of the conference is this in the UK: the withdrawal of government funding of the arts, the encouragement of private enterprise and entrepreneurialism within the arts that's been going on for a number of decades now, the shift in the job of the cultural worker from engagement with art and artists to entrepreneur and fundraiser, and the treatment of members of the public as uninformed statistical bodies. This context leads us to the situation we're in today, where there is a lack of organisation of art workers to challenge these conditions, including those of pay, remuneration, inequality and exploitation, exacerbated by these conditions. All of this, of course, in the UK happens in a broader context, and that broader context is this: the marketization of the previously nationalised or nationally funded industries generally, the governmental need for proof of the economic value of all forms of output, including the arts, and, of course, the biopolitical condition of new working patterns in which we incorporate exploitation and inequality to the point where alternatives seem impossible. We incorporate it, we bring it into our bodies. I called what we need a pragmatic resistance, since we are not only, or not simply, activists working on the outside of institutions, although the voices of activism are very important to us, and many of us are inside and outside of activism or out of institutions all the time. But here we are also artists, curators, workers, and affiliates. I'm an affiliate of small-scale arts organisations, but the very small-scale arts organisations that are often held up as examples of cultural industrial enterprise and endeavour and success in by public and private funders, as well as the media. We produce cultural wealth in terms that are both deeply embedded in a history of autonomous and egalitarian aesthetic expression and absolutely capitalised. In this situation, the tools we need are not necessarily philosophical or conceptual, although, of course, that's where I get my stuff from, but practical. How can the small-scale arts sector survive as more than simply a pawn in the development of deferred value for the ever-decreasing pool and more exclusive pool of larger and highly ambitious players within the field? In the last few years, as Ben and Emily have introduced, common practice has successfully argued for the deferred value and generative capacity of small-scale arts organisations working with emerging ideas and practices. This argument has worked well and has been taken up by private and public sponsors in the UK, as elsewhere. It's been influential internationally. But this argument locates the work of small-scale arts organisations at the bottom of a ladder of value creation that is ultimately organised around the construction of financial value. Is this the only future for small-scale arts organisations? Is this the only argument that can be made in their favour? I think this is a crucial argument, question that we need to ask today. In a period of arts funding that is explicitly encouraging competition and meritocratic ascendancy within the arts, competitive ascendancy within the arts, we need to help each other develop tools that return the language that has been taken from us, the language of autonomy, creativity, of culture, of cultural wealth, and of public participation and engagement. All those terms have been repurposed by the capital that now surrounds the art industry. We need to return that language to its social origin within inclusive work of small-scale cultural provision, within the UK. This, of course, is swimming against the tide, and it's very difficult. We know from Michel Foucault, through David Harvey, to even Thomas Piketty, so, high-profile figures, we know that it's the state's role to make sure that markets function effectively. So it's the state's role to make sure markets function effectively. This is Foucault's definition of neoliberalism. And that, for example, for a very pertinent example, the Arts Council is a branch of the state. But can we make an argument for a revised understanding of what small-scale arts organisations are? This is what we need to do today. Spaces of contemplation and discussion outside of the market, public assets in the sense that they are useful and valuable, artistically and socially. They are places where you can go to escape, to be confronted by new configurations, and to have your ideas challenged and changed, rather than places that help to configure art as simply as just another asset class. So this is the contradiction that we need to confront today. We need to begin to work together today to try and find arguments that suggest that there's another way of thinking about the small-scale arts in the UK. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, Charlotte Higgins from The Guardian. Thank you.